Monday night Bible study. Tonight we're going to John chapter 5, and this will be part 1 of this part in our series, our conversations with Jesus in the Gospel of John, as we're going through the book of John, and we're looking at particular interactions Jesus had with specific people. And these are some of the more dominant interactions, conversations he had with people. Some of them that really take up an entire chapter. And as we've seen so far in this study, as we've looked at Jesus and Nathanael, Jesus and Nicodemus, Jesus and the woman at the well in Samaria last week. Tonight we're going to look at the story, or the first part of the story. This one I'm going to divide into 2 parts because it's too long. There's too much to cover all in one session. So we'll be coming back to this next week as we look at the instance where Jesus went to the pool of Bethesda in Jerusalem there and healed a man who had been crippled for many years and so forth. So we're going to have a little historical background, some archaeological background about this, some very interesting things about this location at the pools of Bethesda. So we'll be looking at that. Let's go ahead and we'll start in our scriptures first. Here in John chapter 5 and verse 1, after this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now this could have been the Passover, or it could have been, I think, Pentecost, or the feast of Sukkot, which is the Feast of Tabernacles. There were 3 feasts when all Jewish men were required to go to the temple and kind of report there and things they were supposed to do there. So regardless of whether it was or not, anyway, it was a feast. So Jesus went to Jerusalem. It says, now there is at Jerusalem by the sheep market a pool, which is called in the Hebrew tongue Bethesda, having 5 porches. In these lay a great multitude of impotent folk, blind, halt, withered, waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel went down at a certain season into the pool and troubled the water. Whosoever then first, after the troubling of the water, stepped in, was made whole of whatever disease he had. Excuse me. Now, just in this part right here, we could probably spend a lot of time, go a long time. It's a very intriguing instance here, and in the details that we're given, where it says at this Bethesda pool, it says this angel went down at a certain season into the pool and troubled the water. And whoever then was first after the water was troubled, basically it began to kind of boil and bubble up. The Bethesda pool is a spring-fed pool. More so at that time, the amount of water that it has now is nowhere near the amount of water even that it had then in Jesus' day, the 1st century. But at certain times, even way after the 1st century, the water in the pool, for whatever reason, not exactly sure, but it would just become agitated, kind of boiling, sort of like you may have seen a springs do that, something like maybe you might see at Yellowstone if you've ever been there. Now the water is not hot. It's not like a hot mineral water. It's not a hot pool, but it's just good, drinkable water that comes out of that spring. So anyway, there are different schools of thought on this. We tend to think that, okay, God sent an angel down into the pool, stirred up the water just to arbitrarily from time to time heal people, just as an act of grace and mercy to heal people. That's kind of one school of thought we could think of on this. There's another side which believes that this angel, or what they thought to be an angel, was not an angel of God, but it was a counterfeit, basically a satanic counterfeit healing. My jury's still kind of out on that. Personally, I tend to go with the second explanation on this. The reason is because that area around that Bethesda pool, even at times when excuse me, the Israelites were there. I'm going to have to get a cough drop. I was trying to avoid this, but I'm going to have to get one. Even during times when the Israelites were there in Jerusalem, they had occupation of it. This place was one of the places that was a pagan worship site. And there was a belief around that pool that it was associated with an earth spirit that stirred up the water. So this account about that an angel went down into at a certain season into the pool, maybe a case that they thought an angel went down at a certain season into the pool. Another reason why I believe this may very well have been a satanic counterfeit healing is because nowhere in Scripture do we find any precedent for this ever happening. Nothing like this ever happened. Now that's not to say that just because there's no, specific scriptural precedent for it, that it was not an angel of God that, he sent down there and healed. But if I had to stand on a position on that, I'm going to stand more with the second explanation, that it actually was a satanic counterfeit healing. And we'll go into a little bit more about that at the end of tonight's session as we read some more verses there when we get to that. But here again, this is one of those things, this is kind of, what I think. I wouldn't argue with anybody that had a different viewpoint on that. So anyway, that's an area of study. So if any of you want to kind of look up on that and see what you can find on that, well, we can discuss it next time in part 2. All right. Let's take a trip. Come with me to Jerusalem and we'll look at some things. This is a sign that we searched and searched and searched and searched to find this place. You wouldn't believe how if you know where this place is, it's very easy to get to. But if you don't know where it is, you can't find it. And I'm going to tell you, I hope that all of you, if you want to, get to go to Jerusalem someday. And I'm going to tell you this, if you ever do get to go there, you will get lost. Don't worry about it, because if you're within the old city, there's a wall all the way around it, so you'll eventually, just keep walking, you'll eventually come to something that looks familiar and you'll figure out where you are. We hunted and hunted for this place. Finally, kind of stumbled across it. Go inside, and there's, at this side, this is right next to really a kind of a small gateway, huge big stone wall, and you go in, and this church is the Cathedral of St. Anne. Now, this goes into a whole kind of a Catholic tradition. They believe that St. Anne was Mary's mother. There's no historical facts to verify that, it's just kind of a Catholic tradition. This is supposed to be built on or somewhere near the birthplace of St. Anne and so forth. Anyway, this church, Catholic church, was built in around 1858, 1859, when the land of Israel was under the Ottoman Empire. During the last days of the Ottoman Empire, which we would know of it as Turkey, was under Turkish ownership, I guess, domination, I guess you could say, dominion. As reward for the French assistance to the nation of Turkey in the Crimean War, they gave France this location and allowed them to go in here and build this cathedral that you see in this photograph. So anyway, a little bit of history there. This is not a really ancient building. It's built about 1858, 59. Very beautiful place. As you can see there, a lot of palm tree, different trees there, a lot of flowers and things. Very beautiful courtyard. And where Julie is standing to take this photograph, she would have been standing on about the eastern edge of part of the original pool of Bethesda. Well, there's another picture here. You can see the flowers and stuff in the corner. Very beautiful. And we just come in the gate, and we were walking down the big wide kind of walkway through there, and there was a nun out there, and I guess the father, he was the father priest there, and everything, all the signs were written in French, so we were, that just made us even more lost. But we kind of, could get the idea. Well, anyway, this priest, I guess, came out there, really nice, long robe and everything, and we expected him to speak to us in French. So he walked up and spoke perfect English, greeted us, and he said, "Are you two with the archaeologists?" We said, "Well, sort of." We didn't know. He knew or had met part of the group that were associated with the group we were there with, and they were having a meeting up at the Rockefeller Center. So anyway, that was kind of struck us as funny. So we got into a conversation with this Catholic priest, and he told us all about the place, and gave us some pointers and things like that, some good information. So it was very, very interesting, wonderful place, and we were about the only people in there. It's not a real touristy place because it's hard to find if you don't know where it is. So anyway, let's look at some of the ruins here. Now, this is a view kind of looking sort of to the north. From where this photograph is taken, I'll stand here and look at it from your point of view. The Temple Mount would be back that way, probably a quarter mile back, behind you this way. Some of the things you can see here, and I know this photograph is probably not real clear. There are several different layers of ruins represented here. This column right here in the middle is from the Byzantine period, which was like from 328 up to around the 7th century, 630 something, 620, 630 something. The ruins below it are 2nd century Roman, late 1st, 2nd century Roman, like under Hadrian. Would have been when the Romans, after the destruction of Jerusalem, came back and rebuilt Jerusalem, renamed it Aelia Capitolina, totally rebuilt the city as a Roman city, and they came in and they built many things here in this area. Right here, I don't know if you can see it very well, but right here is part of a Roman arch that's been excavated, and that arch was part of a Roman temple to the Greek god of healing, Asclepius. If you're familiar with Asclepius, the Greek god, Romans called it Serapis. You've seen, like on the doctor's office, the pole with the two snakes and the wings. Well, that's supposed to be the staff of Asclepius. So the Romans built a temple here to the god of healing, Asclepius. So this became a pagan altar and pagan worship site because they believed these waters had healing powers, which apparently somehow they did. Because somehow when this water was stirred up and whoever got in the water apparently was legitimately healed. So anyway, later on the Romans came and they built that. Back here, these are the kind of the modern retaining walls, and up above that retaining wall there are houses and buildings up there and all that. This excavation started in about around 1913. The first time they discovered any of the ruins that I'm going to show you in these photographs was in about 1888 when they came in to make some repairs to the Cathedral of St. Anne. And as they began to excavate, they found two of the pools, the main pools, the water reservoirs that they previously had not known were there. So anyway, these excavations aren't all that old, and they've been excavated more from time to time over a period of years. Okay, in this photograph, we're looking more or less west. It'd be like from where this photograph is taken. If you just turned this way and took the photograph, that's what you would see. So where that pillar and stuff was, that would be like on the right. This is looking to the west. What we have here is a conglomeration of ruins that have been built up over several years. Up here, you can see the modern buildings and things that are up there, built up above these excavations. Right here's another one of these Byzantine pillars. I think over there's another one that are still there from when the Byzantine cathedral and structure was there. Let me draw a diagram here right quick so that you'll kind of have a little better idea of what we're looking at. And I'm going to draw this and then I'll move out of the way so you can see it. Okay. And this will be somewhat kind of the, I tell you what, one thing I'm going to wall and that building represents the temple, just so you know. All right. Okay. If you were flying in a hot air balloon over the city of Jerusalem in the first century when Jesus was there, one of the things you would have been able to see was the temple over here on that wall there, and here's the Antonia Fortress about right here. Antonia Fortress. And from up there, you would have been able to see the pools of Bethesda. There were two main reservoirs that they had partially cut out of the limestone, partially built up with stones. These two pools had these colonnaded porches built all the way around the sides, and right down there's a dam, a fairly wide stone dam right in the middle that separates the northern pool from the southern pool. Now, from all of this is lower than this is up here. It's a fairly steep grade coming up here. So all the water that collected on the hill up here, they had channeled and dammed and directed where it would run down here and it would catch in these pools. These pools, when they were in use, were about 18 to 20 feet deep. And they were about probably, I read the dimension the other day, I can't remember how big they were, but they were fairly good size. I'm thinking the northern pool was like 40 by 50. in size, and the southern pool was probably a little bit bigger. So they held a lot of water, and they had it engineered where the water would run into the northern pool, and when it was full, it would run into the southern pool. They could also regulate the flow of water from the northern to the southern pool, because many times in the southern pool they would use it for a mikveh, which we know is a ritual bath where they'd go in there and purify. So people coming in from this side of the city, in the area, as they were coming to the temple, they could go in this mikveh and they could wash and be purified to go to the temple and make their sacrifices. And we know what would be down here on the downhill side of the temple is the pool of Siloam, where they could also go and wash and come back up to the temple and make their sacrifices. Now, they also had this engineered where both of these pools were water reservoirs to supply water to the temple, because it took a tremendous amount of water for all the things they had to do there. Remember, they made animal sacrifices every day, and remember on the feast days they made a tremendous amount of animal sacrifices, and they had to have a lot of water to wash all that stuff out with. So they had water channels cut into the rock that would either catch this water and divert it away from these pools and go straight to the Temple Mount, or it would collect here and then they could divert it out and send it down to the Temple Mount whenever they needed it, and have a constant flow of fresh water to the temple for the things they needed there. Also, this kept a supply of living water, flowing water. And they try not to ever let that just sit there and get stagnant and so forth. Now, in the, I think, 1950s, they began to come in here and do extensive excavations on this area. No, not the 1950s. 1920s. After the initial excavation in 1913, I think it was in 1928, they came back in here and began more extensive excavations. Now, one of the greatest things they found is a fact that verifies the biblical story. One of the things the Bible detractors used to try to claim that the Bible wasn't true was that this pool in Bethesda described as having 5 porches. And they said, well, we've never found any pools, any mikveh, anything like that, any reservoirs anywhere that were built in that configuration. So that must be a made-up story, or they didn't know what they were talking about. So, lo and behold, guess what happened? As they began to excavate this pool, and they figured out that this is, a very large pool. And they began to figure out that, wait a minute, it had colonnaded porches all the way around it, but that would only be 4 sides. And then they discovered, well, right here in the middle is this huge stone dam that actually makes this 2 separate pools, and lo and behold, it had a colonnaded porch on it too. So that makes 5 colonnaded porches on that pool. So it was one good example of archaeology verifying a biblical fact. So interesting things they found there. But that kind of gives us an idea of the size, the configuration, the amount of water, what these things were used for, and so forth. Now, to try to make this photograph a little less confusing, I'm going to draw you a little bit of a diagram of what we're looking at here and why. Okay, the St. Anne's Cathedral, the one that I showed you a couple of pictures ago that's there today, that was built in the 1850s. It sits about right here. And then the streets over here, and I think it's the, isn't that the Via Dolorosa? I think that's the name of that street. Anyway, the gate where you come in here. Anyway, so that's the St. Anne's Cathedral there. Now, what we're looking at in this photograph are, you're seeing, all this stuff right in here. And that's a bunch of pillars and rocks and ruins and stuff scattered out all over in here. A lot of those are Roman ruins. Some are from the first century Jewish structures that were there, different miscellaneous things. What happened in around 4th century, 40, 50, something like that, during the Byzantine era, they came in here and they built their cathedral right over part of that dam. And they built it right between the two pools, the north and south. And because these pools were so deep, they built these tall columns, these pillars. Well, you can't see them there. Let me go ahead and move to a... come back to that. Okay, right here. This is a pretty good photo of that. You see these tall arched columns here? What those are the foundation columns of the Byzantine cathedral that was built in about the probably 4th or 5th century. When they began to excavate that, all that was covered up. It was all filled in. You see this, all this dirt and rock and stuff over here? All that is just backfill that's either been dumped in there or washed in there over years and years and years, because it's just the way they do in that part of the country. If there is some abandoned part of the city and they're going to build something new over here, they just take all the stuff there and they just throw it in the hole. Whatever's the closest hole, that's where they throw everything. And there's one part of this where you can see very clearly stratified layers of stuff that they've thrown in there over the years. They haven't completely excavated all of the debris out of these pools. Most of this southern pool is all filled in. As a matter of fact, this part of this mass of backfill you're looking at there comes to about right here. So there's only about this much of this southern pool that has been excavated. And I'll show you a picture in a second where they come in here. They have come in here and excavated a small spot right there where you can climb down some stairs, and they found that southeast corner of that southern pool. But they will probably never excavate all of that because there's buildings and stuff built on top of all the backfill that they threw in there and then, built over it over the years. So
how deep is that?
That is about probably 20 feet deep. So, and it was that shows you the amount of water that it held back in those days. This part right there is part of the center dam. That's part of this dam that was built. The bottom part, and you can't really tell it in this photograph, but you can see it right there. That's the native limestone. And a lot of that reservoir, they cut out all the way through the native limestone down, so the bottom of it's all in bedrock. The rest of it's built up with stones. But that's part of it right there. And so this part of the structure is from Byzantine era, and that lasted until the 7th century AD, around about 628 or 30, when the Muslims came in and they took over Jerusalem, and all this became abandoned. They destroyed a lot of it and so forth. The Muslims held it until around 1099, 1100, when the Crusaders came in. The Crusaders took Jerusalem in about, I think, around 1100 or so. And when they did, because they knew what this site was somehow, probably because they found ruins of a Byzantine church here, so they knew about where it should be, and there was still a spring there. They knew it was supposed to be the pool of Bethesda, so they built a cathedral on top of that. They just built onto the remaining ruins of the Byzantine cathedral. So you've got a whole kind of a hodgepodge of construction here of Roman stuff, and then Byzantine built on top of that, and then you got Crusader stuff built on top of that, and then you got, modern day stuff up there on top of that. So it's a whole layer upon layer of structures there in this one spot.
So where's the spring now? Is it diverted?
The spring,
Somewhere else, and obviously it doesn't
No.
go there anymore.
if you could, there's
Oh, is
water way down here in the bottom,
Oh, is it still going
but
through there?
it still collects water.
Okay.
Matter of fact, let me go to this next photo. Might be yeah. Okay, one of the things, a Roman cistern. Now, this is, okay. All right, in this photo, we're looking at the south side of that dam that separates. This photograph, this right here, this is the north side of that dam that separates the two pools. So what you have is this structure, and anyway, when the Crusaders came, they finished it on out over the whole part of the dam. So over here, this photo we're looking at right here is about right in there. It's the Romans came in and they, built this arched structure over the top of that, and they, use this for water cistern and so forth. And you can't really tell in the photo, but there's still water in there. Now, it doesn't really run like a spring anymore. You can't see water bubbling up out of the ground anywhere because, like a lot of places in the world, the aquifer has been depleted. So, you really don't have springs bubbling up anywhere. I mean, the Gihon spring still flows pretty well, but even not apparently like it did in its original time. So, but it's amazing when you go in here and see this structure that is still there all the way from, this was probably built maybe 100 years after Jesus, lifetime on earth, maybe 100 years. So this nearly, this is 1900 years old. And it's just as solid as the day it was built, and the water cistern down there, and there's kind of, moss in there. It's pretty dismal down there, really, to tell you the truth. Kind of a spooky, that whole ruins, the pool of Bethesda, it's really kind of a spooky place because it's, it's surrounded by a city, but it's kind of quiet there, not a lot of people there, and these old ruined crypts and old dungeon-looking places like this and everything, and so it's kind of spooky, to tell you the truth.
Are there archaeology digs that go on in that?
There are no present excavations going on anywhere in this area. I don't know that they ever will excavate any more there. It's not likely that they will because it's really at a point almost of completion as far as from an archaeological standpoint. Now they could go out there, say maybe in this area and excavate some more. They would probably find some maybe older ruins, older artifacts, because, and here's one, I'm glad you asked me that, because one thing I forgot to point out. Okay. Who and at what time period were these two pools built? Who did all this work to create these two pools? These go all the way back to about the 7th or 8th century BC. This probably would have been about the time of Hezekiah. Remember Hezekiah, he was really quite a reformer. Hezekiah is the one who had them dig the Gihon tunnel to make sure they had a source of water inside the city. In case they became attacked by enemies, they would at least have water. So there's pretty good reason to believe archaeologically that these pools go back to about 700 BC or so, around that time of Israel and Judah, so forth when the kingdom was still there and Israel occupied Jerusalem before the Babylonian captivity. So that's probably when those were built, and they were built for, washing and as a water source. Another thing too, we want to remember that in our text, this was near the sheep market, so there were also pools around here, and that may be what some of these ruins had to do with, and that is for the sheep market, washing the sheep, because they would do that. When they brought the sheep in, a lot of times they would wash and clean them up. Sometimes that would have to do with their shearing the sheep and all those kind of things they did with the sheep, involved with the sheep market. So in this whole area of these pools in that time, there was a whole industry, a very active, thriving area here. There would have been a lot of people there. And no doubt when Jesus went there that day, there were a lot of people here because it being a feast time, a lot of people in Jerusalem. So there would have been quite a few people here when Jesus went and met this fellow there. Don't know if there's a particular reason why he picked him out, but anyway, he did. Let's see. Let's finish up this. This is kind of a map, sort of showing a diagram of some of those things we talked about. Let's see, Roman cistern. Yeah. This is, if you walk down these stairs and you look over that deal, that railing there, down that hole, you can see down to the bottom of the southern pool, the southeast corner of the southern pool. And you can't really tell in this photograph, but you can see all the way down to the bottom of that pool, and it's way down there. So this is a very large and very deep pool. And this is the actual corner. So for some reason they had not, made this in a 90-degree angle. Don't have any idea why. So that pool had been a little bit of an odd shape, kind of wider at the bottom than it was at the upper end. But anyway, they've excavated that. All of the rest of that pool is all filled in with backfill and debris and rock and dirt, and no telling what has been thrown in there over the years. All right, so let's go back to our text. Any other questions on any of the other stuff, photos or archaeology or any of that on that? And if you do, if you think of something, we can go back to that before we close. A certain man was there which had an infirmity 38 years. When Jesus saw him lie and knew that he had been now a long time in that case, he saith unto him, Wilt thou be made whole? The impotent man answered him, Sir, I have no man, when the water is troubled, to put me into the pool. But while I am coming, another steppeth down before me. Jesus saith unto him, Rise, take up thy bed, and walk. So here we find Jesus is asking this man a simple question. Basically, we would have said, do you want to get well? Now the man could have said, well, what do you think I'm late? We might kind of think that. What do you think yeah, sure, I'm here. I've been here 38 years. The water stirred up. I can't get there because I'm crippled. Everybody gets in before me, and I've been here 38 years trying to get in there and haven't been successful yet. So Jesus said, Rise, take up your bed and walk. Healed him just with his word. And immediately the man was made whole and took up his bed and walked. And on the same day was the Sabbath. The Jews therefore said unto him that was cured, It is the Sabbath day. It's not lawful for thee to carry thy bed. He answered them, He that made me whole, the same said unto me, Take up thy bed and walk. So he didn't even know who Jesus was. Just knew this man came along, asked him this question, said, Get up, take up your bed and walk. He did. He was healed, and so he did what the man told for him to do. Well, here comes the Pharisees, and they're going to make sure that they enforce the law. And this, in the law of Moses on the Sabbath day, you're not supposed to carry burdens and all those kind of things. So, they took it to the far extreme and really became oppressive with it. You're breaking the law, carrying furniture on the Sabbath day, carrying your bed. Well, the guy that, healed me told me to do so. Then asked they him, and this gets me, this question right here gets me. Then asked they him, what man is that which said unto thee, take up thy bed and walk? Did you guys, how could you not get that? The fact that this man had been miraculously healed, just how did that not make a tremendous difference to them? How were they so blinded by their adherence to the law that they just totally ignored that this man had been miraculously healed, and all they could be concerned about was, who is it that said to you, take up your bed and walk? I want to ask the question, were miraculous healings so common in that day that they just didn't even think anything about it? I don't think they were. I think they were just so hung up on that nitpicky point of the law that they couldn't even see past it. And, much less have some compassion and mercy on this guy and ask him about it. So, wow, what happened, man? How long have you been there? What you were crippled, right? Tell us what happened, Isn't that what we would do? If we encountered somebody that we knew beyond a shadow of a doubt, and we're not talking about some, made-up, contrived healing, but one that really was genuine, verifiable healing, wouldn't we want to know all about it? What happened, and everything, but not them. Oh no. Who's told you to take up your bed and walk? So, he that was healed wist not who it was, for Jesus had conveyed himself away, a multitude being in that place. And, so the man didn't know it was Jesus. He probably he'd been laying here for 38 years, and we don't have any accounts of Jesus ever going here except for that one time. It's the only account we ever have of him going there. This may be the only time he ever went up in that area. And so the man didn't know who he was. And when he was, obviously excited, carrying his bed, got the Pharisees' attention, and so they surrounded him, and they're grilling him about, what are you doing carrying your bed on the Sabbath day? And Jesus knew that. And I guarantee you, with the kind of multitude that was there at that time, it was not hard for Jesus to just blend in the crowd and, and vanish into the crowd. And here's one of the things that if you ever have the opportunity to go to the Middle East, you're going to learn pretty quickly about Middle Eastern crowds of people. It's nothing. This is one of the things of their culture that is nothing like our culture here. As Americans, we love one another, but we like our space, And you generally don't see people in our culture form the kind of crowds that they do. And unless you've been in one of those crowds and those little narrow streets and all that jostling around, it's a different thing. It's very interesting. It's something everybody should experience, but it's different. One of those cultural characteristics. So in this place, because the sheep market was there and the feast was going on, and people were there to be healed, and there was hundreds, maybe thousands of people there. So Jesus has vanished into the crowd, but he knew where this guy was. He didn't lose sight of him. Afterward, Jesus findeth him in the temple, and said unto him, Behold, thou art made whole. Sin no more, lest a worse thing come unto thee. Now, here's my question. What do you think the man's sin was that Jesus was referring to? We tend to read this as though oftentimes we think of sin as just sin in general. repent your sins and so forth, believe and all that. But one thing we need to keep in mind is that every time Jesus made a statement like this to someone, for example, the woman that had been taken in adultery, remember that the Pharisees were going to stone to death right there in front of him and asked him, what should we do? And he said, well, go ahead, just whichever one of you is without sin, throw the first stone. Remember what he said to the woman? He said, go and sin no more. Well, he was specifically talking to her about the specific sin that almost got her stoned to death. Now, by the same token, Jesus is talking to this man about a specific sin that he's telling him about. Sin no more, lest the worst thing come unto thee. Now, here's my thinking on it. And like I said, I wouldn't argue with anybody about this. This is just my thinking about it. I think he is telling him not to rely on any powers for his healing or his provision or his faith other than the Lord God. Because some of the things we know about the pool of Bethesda was that even in Israel's day, when they were there, and the Jews lived there and had control of that place, there was still a lot of pagan worship going on. And there were people who went to the temple, like this man did, and performed their rituals, made their sacrifices, gave their offerings, and did all those religious things they were supposed to do. But at the same time, they looked to other gods too. They would have, those things in their house, or they would maybe, give an offering at some altar for some god for rain or for healing or something like that. So my thought on this is that Jesus is speaking to this man, telling him, don't go to any place or of or before any other god for anything that you need. And we know that Jesus, let me think of how to put this. I don't want to put what I want to say. God had given his promises to Israel, that he would provide for them, he would protect them, he would be everything to them that they needed. By the power of his name, his Jehovahness and his grace and his mercy would be their entire provision. And the thing that they did that got them in trouble, you remember this from the 5 cycles of judgment, was that they turned to other gods and they walked contrary to God and they worshipped other gods. Now, they didn't abandon the temple. They kept going to the temple and they kept doing their religious thing, but they were worshiping other gods too. And I think that's what this guy was doing. We know that that was happening in Israel because there were too many instances of demon possession and things like that, which really can't happen unless a person is directly involved in some kind of satanic activity. So that's my thoughts on this, and I believe that's what Jesus is referring to in this man's sin and why. Let's see if that's the. Let's go ahead and read. The man departed and told the Jews that it was Jesus, which had made him whole. And therefore did the Jews persecute Jesus and sought to slay him, because he had done these things on the Sabbath day. Now, you have to ask the question, what kind of mentality gets to that point where you totally overlook everything about Jesus that pointed to him as the Messiah and his ability to heal people, to the point where they just wanted to kill him because he'd healed this man on the Sabbath day and told him to pick up his bed and walk. So man, what blindness, what blindness. But I guess we have a lot of religious blindness in our world today too. a lot of religious, narrow-minded bigotry in our day too. Let's see. Okay, yeah, we'll pick up. Where do we leave off? Verse 16. We're going to pick up in verse 17 in chapter 5 next week, as we really kind of, as interesting as all this is, it really just sets the stage for what's coming after that. And next week, Lord willing, of course, we're able to gather back here together. We're going to get into some amazing things that Jesus said as we go through the rest of this chapter. So, all right, any questions or discussions or thoughts on this before we close tonight? Any different ideas on maybe specifically what you think this man's sin might have been? Y'all think that kind of makes sense, what I, thought?
The only thing that I was gonna check up on, like you said, look it up, see, I know when it says for an angel went down, it doesn't say an angel of the Lord or an angel of God or God's angel, and I was looking and it says that in a lot of places, but in this place it doesn't.
Yeah. And that's the thing, see, it doesn't specify that God sent that angel down there to stir up the water. We assume that, but just because it says angel, but we have to remember, the devil has angels too. And his angels aren't going to show up with, horns and a pitchfork. They're going to appear as angels of light, just like he does. So, this is one of those Bible study fundamental principles that we need to learn to keep in mind. Don't make assumptions, because nothing's arbitrary in the Bible. And these things that are in there are specific. And it's just like in any investigation, not only do you examine the things that are there, but also look for what's not there, And what's not there is that it specifically states God sent this angel, or that it was an angel of God. So we need not assume that it was just because an angel showed up there, the water was stirred up, and people were healed. Because apparently this went on even after Jesus' time, even after the Romans had destroyed Jerusalem, because it was, nearly 100 years after Jesus' time when the Romans came back in and rebuilt the whole city. And there in that place, they built, temples to Asclepius and all those kind of things. They wouldn't have built temples to the God of healing had there not been some belief and possibly healings still going on there. So, point being that if Satan can counterfeit healings or miracles, and we know that in the last days, in the end times, he will be given the ability to do that. The beast and the false prophet and so forth, they will be given the ability to counterfeit miracles, healings, and possibly even raising people from the dead, all those kind of things. So point being, we just don't want to make assumptions without the facts. Good Bible study principle to keep in mind. Good point.
Now, I enjoy seeing the pictures that you put up there.
Yeah.
I find those so fascinating.
Yeah.
Especially, we'll probably never be able to go there, but to see the pictures and then have you explain it and give us a detail of what they actually are, that's just wonderful.
That's why we go.
From an archaeological standpoint, do you ever wish that the stones could talk?
Well,
They talk in their own way.
yeah, in a way they do.
But,
the
just
stones talk. But yeah, if they could only speak out,
Right.
because really, as good as archaeology is, it really only answers very few questions. And one of the reasons is because actually very little has been excavated. There are places like Jericho, places even around Jerusalem, Tel Safi, where we've excavated, that a really small percentage has been excavated. So if you could excavate all of it and find out everything that's there, you would get it would confirm a lot of what is known, but you would get a different viewpoint as well. You would learn a lot of things. It would verify some things. It would raise a lot more questions. Archaeology can't answer every question, but it can answer a lot of them. And one of the things about it is that archaeology continues to verify historical facts of the Bible. So yeah, it's good, and it's an important thing, and thankfully that it's ongoing and new discoveries are being made all the time. But yeah, that's why we enjoy it, but that's why we go to see it, to learn it, and we can come back and show you. We hope you get to go someday, but we know that most people will never get a chance to make it over there, and so maybe you can see it through our eyes.
On this,
Go ahead.
sin no more.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at that, the guy's crippled. What other sin could he have other than worshiping a foreign god
Yeah.
and believing that the waters of this foreign god would heal him?
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus shows him it's not the water that does the healing; it's
Yeah.
the faith
Yeah.
in God
Yeah.
that does the healing. That would be the sin no more he is that he has his faith in the wrong place.
Right. That's it. That's it. He was going to a pagan god for, even if he, he might have kind of had the attitude, I don't really believe that, but even though he was going to the place where the pagan god was honored and given credit for the healing, maybe even if it was in kind of a roundabout way, it still was. So he was taking part in that, and he was basically doing the same thing that King Ahaziah did, which was to tell his people, go and inquire of the God of Ekron for me if this or that is going to happen. And it was walking contrary to God. So that's what I believe this man was doing. He was seeking, healing power from gods other than the God of Israel. So anyway, I think that's what specifically his sin was. And a lot of other people were doing it too.
Did this pool have a bench, or did it just drop off 20 foot? Because if somebody was sick,
Yeah.
stepped off in 20 foot of water.
I'm thinking that they believe that they controlled the level in that southern pool. Okay, at certain times they controlled it down to they kept it at 3 or 4 foot level. And I'm assuming, because nearly all those pools have steps going down to them. That could be the case. Now, it could be that it was full, that they kept it full. So, it may have been that if, the water was stirred up, you jumped in and you're crippled and you can't swim, you better hope it heals you or you're going to drown. And
That's the way I learned that with my brother.
And if we knew the whole rest of the story surrounding this, there were probably people, if they did keep it full, there were probably people who jumped in there and drowned. Because that's just human nature. Because I guarantee you, when all those people were crowded around there and that water started to churn and bubble up, it was a mass confusion of people rushing and pushing. So whoever was there in the front or around the edge, they were going in the water because the people behind them were going to shove them in the water, trying to get to the water. So, it was a whole big mess when that happened. So yeah, there were probably people that got shoved in and drowned. More than likely, because that's just the way crowds of people do.
Then they just look at it and say, well, too bad you didn't get
Too bad you didn't get healed, Or, there may have been, you can't really it's hard to tell if apparently there weren't, steps going down into it. They're not visible in any of the excavated parts. So, there may not have been. Not that you can tell, or up in the upper levels, there may have been. There may have been several levels of steps going down to it and in the deep part of the water. So, it could have been that way.
Well, I'm very visual when I try to imagine things. And I looked at this room and I'm thinking, okay, this is about 12 feet, tall or whatever, so almost double that.
Yeah.
Just to imagine how deep this thing really is.
It was deep. Yeah. They're very deep pools. Let's go back here. Whoop.
Well, the pool of Siloam is used for what purpose?
It was basically a mikveh. It really wasn't used for a water reservoir. Now they may have used it for a water reservoir. More than likely they did, because they didn't have to have it for for purification purposes on a large scale all the time. Now anybody that came to the temple, they could go down there and wash. But outside the temple, there were also smaller mikvot out there, all around the outside of the temple. You can see them today. But the pool of Siloam was mainly used when large groups of people came for the feast days. They could all, go down on one side, go in the water, wash, put on their clean clothes, go out, climb up the steps to the temple, and make their
That
sacrifices
was
and
used for
everything.
their cleansing.
Yeah, that was used for cleansing.
But Bethesda was used for,
Well, Bethesda probably was used for purification as well. And it may have been that when a feast day was coming up, when it needed to be used for, ritual washing, they would, make all the crippled people go away or whatever, or something. And they would set it aside, or maybe they'd have one part of it, where they could come in, use it for washing, and then go out. They may have lowered the water level down to a certain level where, you could go down the steps, wash, and then come out and so forth.
What I want
It's
to know is
possible.
where all the sheep were.
Yeah. But the sheep,
The
yeah,
upstream.
more than likely, the sheep washing pools were probably
Yeah.
like, they would have been over here.
Oh, okay.
Because this would have been somewhat still downhill from this area up here. And there are different channels carved in the stone to channel the water in different ways. So they probably had separate pools over here that are still covered up, maybe never even been excavated, that are there, and so that's where they wash the sheep. They didn't wash the sheep. This mainly was for people, and it's water reservoir for the temple. So they didn't wash any sheep in there. And more than likely they did. They probably had a sheep jump in there every now and then and had to fish it out. But yeah, you can kind of get an idea of how deep that is. And
why in the world would someone come build a building right in the center of that?
well, because it was a biblical site where Christ performed a healing. Everywhere one of the things that gives a fairly accurate idea of where things happened that Jesus did, places where Jesus was, something that was significant in his life, or recorded in the Gospels, are usually marked by a Byzantine church. Because when they began to build those churches in the 4th century, around 340, 350, well, that was only 150, maybe 200 years after Christ. So even though the Romans had rebuilt over a lot of that, they still had a fairly good idea of where those things happened. In fact, some of the places hadn't been changed. They were, exactly like they were. So this is one of the things that when archaeologists go in and they find Byzantine ruins, they begin to try to match that up and see if it has something to do with some biblical site. And they don't always match up, but a lot of times they do. You remember us talking about the Tower of the Flock as being probably the most probable of the places Jesus was born, where they took care of the sheep that was for the temple sacrifice. Well, right there at that site of the Tower of the Flock, very obscure because it hasn't been completely excavated yet, but if you're able to go there, you can see it. There's part of a mosaic floor remains there from a 2nd century church. It was built there on that site. Now, they wouldn't have built that church there if they weren't reasonably certain that that's where something happened. And in that place, that case there at Tower of the Flock, they were pretty sure that's where Jesus was born. In the 4th century, Queen Helena, who was Constantine's mother, came along and she decided that it was up on the top of the mountain over there, and so she built a cathedral and all that stuff up there. So that's the reason why in the Byzantine era they came in and they built this right over the middle of the pools of Siloam. Number one, they had this big stone dam right here that they could use for a foundation, to start with. So they just built onto that. And it was right there on that site of what they could be pretty sure was a biblical site, the place where Jesus healed this man. So anyway, that's kind of why that was built there.
You said that's about 20 feet deep. How big of an area does that cover?
I think the northern pool is about 40 by 50. So, I don't know, it'd be bigger than this room. This room's probably what?
That's good.
Maybe 20, 25, 30 maybe. Yeah, we can count the panels up here.
About 30 feet.
Yeah, so it'd be bigger than, bigger than this room. They were pretty good size. They weren't huge, but they were fairly good size. Let's see. I didn't include, had a lot of other photos of that, but I didn't include them. So anyway. All right. Nothing else. Let's have a prayer. We'll be dismissed. Father, we thank you again for